presentations, yes. Fritz, I kind of want to ask you a question about, just for you to speak more, because I found it interesting. Because at the end of your presentation, you were asking some questions around rethinking, deconstructing notions of intimacy from a Western perspective, a white perspective perhaps, and I wondered if you could talk more about that, because I think that can generate a lot of positivities and a lot of possibilities.
So the impetus of thinking or rethinking of the concept of intimacy is really from this idea that, you know, when we engage in a particular types or forms of intimacy, it is always a social relational process that it is not, like, it is not, you know, like the subject needs to be engaged, or like you should engage with a partner. You should have, there's like another person to, so that that particular form of intimacy emerges. But then like most, I mean, like based on my understanding of the experiences of my participants, like some of them have no partners at all, or they are even deprived of experiencing particular types of sexual intimacies, be in Canada, and even if they go back to the Philippines, they have to struggle and negotiate those particular, to enact those intimacies that they traditionally do. So I'm thinking that, is it not then that queer subject itself is in the first place are not allowed to experience intimacy at all? So, and when we engage particular forms of intimacy, when we connect with others, are we always then interpolated by heteronormative and white logics? That relationships are always forged by, you know, heteronormativity or homonormativity. So what, because at the, like, you know, so aging then for me is, or later life then becomes for me an interesting side to explore, because it is then that, like based on my participants' experiences, like most of them have no partners at all, then it makes me think that, oh, at the later, in later life, then we, no matter how much we strive for intimacy, then we, like the bakla will still, it's very still difficult for the bakla to, you know, enact that particular intimacy. Like I sound pessimistic, or like you know, so but it's still something that I'm thinking of. So that's the reason. So I also been influenced by Sarah Ahmed's Unhappy Queer, like, you know, the unhappy, like the unhappiness of unhappy queers is a political gift. And then I was thinking, like, you know, if that is the case, so what would be, how generative would it be if we treat intimacy as always an agonistic experience and moment, or even queer intimacy or bakla intimacy? Well, like when we become intimate with others, it's not just ambivalence, but like an agony.
Can I also comment to that, if that's okay, Fritz? Oh, could I also comment to that, if that's okay, Fritz? Yeah. So my understanding, when I returned to the Philippines this summer and my father and I finally got into it, was that he had secretly just been close friends with a lot of bakla and tomboys. In the town he was in, there was a mafia-like Filipino family who had 4 of each. They had a straight man, a straight woman, a bakla, and a tomboy. And the tomboy was my dad's best friend because my dad would not hit on the girls that the tomboy liked. But what he explained to me was that he really delineated the heteronormativity that I'd grown up with and like his own. But what's really interesting, if you look through history, is how that heteronormativity has morphed, right? So pre-colonially, how we understood our sexual relations and gender were just based on our community roles. You know, we chose a partner. The women would choose partners if they had penis pins, because if you don't have a penis pin, how are you gonna make me clitorally orgasm, you know? Like, they had a lot of power in choosing sexual partners. Similarly, the asog, who the priests like who came call them, I guess, sacred transvestites, which is a very awkward and insulting term, because they were priestesses in their own right, and sometimes they would marry men. So when you see that evolve with Spanish colonization and the systematic destruction of the priestesses, of women in power, and of the asog, then so that they can put up their patriarchy, then you see people making choices, people being pushed by socioeconomic laws, but like their circumstances. So that for my father, he understood tomboys as only dating straight women, and for Bakla, only dating straight men. And I was like, well, why is that? He's like, they don't do gay to gay, as was an amazing term. I did not hear about that, gay to gay. And my dad was like, well, because the tomboys can help the straight girls, because if the straight girl won't get it with a real man, or just like a cisgender man as we use in Western terms, then she still needs somebody to provide for her, and a tomboy will. For my dad, who had a very problematic view of Bakla, that's contradictory to Fritz's work, which I really love Fritz's work. Oh, Mama Riva. But anyways, he said the Baklas needed straight men to uplift them because socioeconomically, they were hit the hardest by colonization. My dad didn't use the word colonization, but society looks on Bakla down the worst. And we see that also in North America, in the States and Canada, which is a term called transmisogyny, where if we look at this queer spectrum, the people that are impacted the most, the murders that happen the most, are trans women, specifically trans women of color, specifically Black, Latino, Filipino women, right? And that is still directly tied to the colonization of the Spanish in my home country and the colonization of the British here. So when we're talking about moving away from Western heteronormativity, we're talking about being able to both reclaim previous ways of related to each other, but also to move outside of anything that has ever been constructed so that we can truly be ourselves. And that has to be understanding how heteropatriarchy works and trying to oppress us. So I show the columns, and then moving beyond that to just kind of say like a big fuck you and live our lives. Anyways.
As a gendered, racialized, diasporic, and queer subject. How might issues of aging and intergenerational difference impact the subject position of Filipina queer subject? In what ways do the experiences of the elderly lesbian and bakla in Canada reimagine dominant understandings of aging and later life? The presenters of this panel invite us to reflect upon elderly queer Filipinos, thereby allowing us to consider the intimate connection of the Filipino queer body with multiple times and spaces. We will begin with Fritz Luther Pino. He is a PhD candidate at the Department of Social Justice Education at OISI, U of T. His dissertation project focuses on the lives of elderly Filipino gay men in Canada in order to examine later life marginalization and inequalities. He has a Master's of Social Work from U of T and an MA in Psychology from the University of San Jose, Philippines. He finished his Bachelor of Science in Psychology at Southwestern University, Philippines. While completing his dissertation, he serves as program coordinator for seniors at the Silaya Filipino Community Center.
I'm just gonna tie myself too. The title of my talk is Elderly Bakla and the Limits of Queer Intimacy. It was 7 o'clock in the evening when I arrived at the food court, the place where elderly Filipino gay men, my research participants, congregate. Located at the intersection of Yonge and College Street, this is a mall food court that connects to a subway for north and southbound trains. This is also a food court for the various commercial buildings and shops and government offices that are connected to its path. Indeed, this is a very busy food court with a lot of ongoing movement, sounds, lights, and colors, given the centrality of its location in the city of Toronto. It is also hard to tell who and how many people hang in the place because of the swiftness of its pace and the volume of a mixed group of people that pass by. When I arrived, I saw them all sitting at their usual place. the corner that is close to the subway. "Oh, Iha, kumusta na?" One of them, who goes by the name Mia, asked me. "I'm fine po. Kumusta po kayo?" I answered. "Well, Iha, I'm still here waiting for a lalaki," which means a straight man, Mia answered. "Oh, haven't you found anyone yet?" I asked. "No, none, not yet. I haven't fooled anyone yet, Iha. Unlike that one who is sitting there." Mia pointed towards Mama Riva, who is sitting at another table far from the group. Mama Riva is part of their group that hangs out in the food court. I have known him since 2012 through a family friend. I asked, "Why is Mama Riva staying there?" "Oh, he wants to be alone. He's watching teleserye in his iPad." "Go and see him. He would be happy to see you. Don't you know that he will be back to the Philippines again?" Mia excitedly claimed. "Really? How come?" I asked. Mia answered, "You know na, boys are waiting for him there." Mama Riva is an 85-year-old man who identifies as bakla. As Manalansan describes in his groundbreaking book Global Divas, an ethnography of Filipino gay men, the bakla is a conflation of both gender and sexuality. What this means is that in terms of gender, the bakla performs feminine roles such as dressing up and acting as female. In terms of sexuality, the bakla's normative sexual object choice is not another bakla, but the straight man who is someone who identifies as straight, who performs masculine roles and tasks, non-effeminate, and who engages in a sexual relationship with a straight woman. To be sure, the bakla is an emotionally charged word, a derogatory term in the Philippines, and a problematic and anomalous figure. Because of his non-identification with the normative heterosexual practices and desires, along with his effeminate moves that contradict to his male physique, the bakla is considered a deviant. For Mama Riva, however, he claimed that he has never dressed as a woman until he reached at the age of 75, when his close friend asked him to dress on his birthday, and at which he gladly pursued. In fact, at one moment, Mama Riva claimed, "I inday, I will do all these cross-dressing things while I'm still alive." I walked towards Mama Riva. When I came closer to him, I saw he immediately called me. He waved at me and called me. But I asked, "I heard that you're going back to the Philippines again." Mama Riva answered, "Oh yes, of course, Iha. What I'm gonna do here in Canada? I will just be dried up. You know, the drama here, gay to gay. I don't like gay to gay, ha? Please." "That's why I'm going back to the Philippines at least twice. Every quarter yan, ha? Because boys are waiting for me there. I will be able to get wet by a real straight man." Real straight man, Mama Riva emphasized. In this talk, I aim to reflect on the idea and meaning of queer intimacy as that which is experienced and enacted by elderly bakla in Canada. Here, I refer to intimacy as that which is sexual. Here, I'm still reworking on the term intimacy, and this might be departs from the first panel. Indeed, I mean here that bakla intimacy as something that can only be experienced when one has a partner, as in a material bodily contact with a partner. To explore this, I focus on the sexual object choice of the elderly bakla. I contend that such sexual object choice is highly connected to how they make sense of their sexual intimacy as elderly racialized queer subjects in the diaspora. In my field work, most of my participants, such as Mama Riva, uttered yearnings and needs for sexual intimacy. However, such sexual intimacy cannot be easily practiced, enacted, and pursued in the diasporic context of Canada. For Mama Riva, Canadian queers are different from Filipino queers from the Philippines, where he had been socialized. Most of the gay men here in Canada are engaged in sexual relationship with another gay man, Mama Riva narrated. Unlike in the Philippines, we don't do gay to gay. We as bakla in the Philippines engage in sexual relationship with straight men, Mama Riva added. Mama Riva refuses to participate to what he sees as the normative sexual practice of gay men in Canada. Indeed, it enabled him to go back This condition enabled him to go back frequently in the Philippines. I am more open in the Philippines than here, Mama Riva claimed. I really want a straight man. That's why I'm sad here in Canada, he further stressed. Mama Riva explained that poverty in the Philippines enabled straight men to engage in a sexual relationship with a bakla. For Mama Riva, the bakla usually takes the role as the financial provider in the relationship, thereby satisfying the financial needs of a straight man. Thus, in a socioeconomic aspect in the relationship, the bakla performs the masculine role, the financial provider, so he can engage in a sexual relationship with a straight man. Whereas in Canada, according to Mama Riva, the country's better socioeconomic condition prevented straight men from hooking up with gay men with bakla. Since straight men cannot have their own means of life, it would result to rejection or even violence. Being in the Philippines, however, Mama Riva's ability to access his sexual object choice is compromised, limited, or highly negotiated because of his age. In the Philippines, the lolo or grandfather has always been seen as a wise and nurturing figure, not a sexual one. He occupies a privileged position in the family given his role as padre de familia, or head of the household. He maintains his authority by being a breadwinner and his ability to maintain patriarchal familial unit throughout generations. Mama Riva is aware of these social constructions. According to him, he is very careful not being caught by his neighbors or family members when he has sexual encounters with men, particularly younger men. I have some gay contacts, Mama Riva claimed. These young gays are the ones who will connect and introduce me to young men, so I'd be able to keep it discreet, he added. I don't want it to be known by my family and neighbors. You know, I can't imagine how they would react if their lolo who is sexually indulging with young men. Haha, he laughs. Indeed, while it is possible for Mama Riva to experience sexual intimacy in the Philippines, he has to subject himself with particular negotiations, strategies, self-presentations, including guarding oneself from his family, neighbors, or community. He has to negotiate the ways in which his queerness intersects with his age persona. Indeed, we can also think of Mama Riva's move and experience as an alternative form of intimate encounter with another sexual being, the lalaki. Nevertheless, it might also remind us that such an alternative route is always born out of and continues to be entangled with experiences of displacement, disavowal, and exclusion of particular non-normative sexual desire. Two paragraphs. It might be quite a relief to know that Mama Riva has an option to be able to experience sexual intimacy, and that is through going back to the Philippines. Such is indeed a quite privileged option. However, there are others who cannot do or do not have that privilege. Such is the experience of some, if not most, of my participants. They are partnerless. Some live alone. Some live with family members or friends. For example, Mia, in the scenario, lives alone, and he keeps on waiting and longing and yearning for an intimate and ongoing encounter with straight men. So this experience, Mia relied on a limited income support from the government that prevented him to go back to the Philippines. Indeed, those who cannot move back in the Philippines, their option is simply to stay in Canada, deprived of sexual intimacy. According to Mama Riva, as he describes, they are dried up. Given these situations, I ask, is the subject position of the bakla supposedly one that has no intimacy at all, since the bakla is not allowed to experience intimacy in the first place? That is, a bakla is supposedly a partnerless or non-partnered subject. Here, these are some of the thoughts that I'm reflecting on, and I'm still grappling with it. So, or is a racialized and diasporic queerness then is a political position that is devoid of sexual intimacy? And if so, could such become a political gift, similar to what Sarah Ahmed has described, that the unhappiness of queer is a political gift because of its subversive potentials? Or should we rework the term intimacy, or even going beyond the term alternative intimacy, given that intimacy is, after all, has been traditionally based on heterosexual and white logics? How do we account for intimacy of non-partner or unattached bakla? Finally, how generative would it be if we see or treat intimacy of the bakla as always an agonistic experience and moment? Thank you.
Thank you. is Carlo Franco Azores. He has a Master's of Social Work. He's pursuing a Master's of Social Work with a specialization in gerontology at the Factor in Wentash Faculty of Social Work at University of Toronto. He holds a Bachelor of Health Studies specialized honors degree, cum laude, and certificate in health services, financial management from the School of Health Policy and Management at York University. His interests include community-based health and social care interventions for older adults, LGBTQ issues for older adulthood, and experiences of ethno-racial and ethno-cultural older adults in Canada. He is currently training in social work intervention research and development on play intervention for clients and families living with dementia. Please welcome Carlo Azores.
So the title of my presentation today is Kinship and Diasporic Community of Elderly Lesbian Filipinas. The experiences of lesbian elderly Filipina in Canada occurs within a transnational context transcending time and space where their bodies and identities are shaped through webs of global interconnections. In other words, the transnational bodies and identities of lesbian Filipino women assume globality wherein their daily practices are situated simultaneously in both sending and receiving communities of migration. The queer subjectivities of the lesbian Filipina in the diaspora critiques the notions of heteronormativity and traditional notions of domesticity. Such notions of transnationality, globality, and diasporic domesticity in lesbian Filipino women's experiences call attention to the importance of using transnational and queer diaspora lenses in foregrounding our understanding of lived realities of lesbian Filipinas in Canada. Using the aforementioned understanding, I asked the following question: how might the experiences of an elderly lesbian Filipino woman in Toronto speak to and contextualize queer diasporic experiences in relation to kinship and communities? I will present the oral narrative of Kadjo, a 69-year-old lesbian Filipino woman who is a retired registered practical nurse, to inform the ways in which lesbian Filipinas kinship and or care for family and the diasporic lesbian communities and how they are created. So on kinship and or care for family. First, I will present Kadjo's lesbian awakening in the context of her family prior to and after immigration to Canada. So Kadjo immigrated to Canada in 1968 when she was only 16 years old. She is the eldest of 3 children, went to private all-girl high school in the Philippines, and had been out to her family since she was 12 years old. Being a lesbian, according to her, was not a surprise to her family. She said, when I was still a kid, my parents knew I was tibo. And she used the word tibo, which is a slang for lesbian in the Philippines. They were not surprised when I told them that I like girls. She was accepted in her family early on in her life and did not experience objection and derision from her family. Kadjo's narrative, therefore, deviates from the common coming out narratives of many Filipino lesbians. So, for example, the recent coming out of Cherise Pempenko, where she experienced a very negative view from her mother. And her mother was not openly accepting of her sexual orientation. According to Kadjo, her being lesbian and her gender expressions were accepted, but also it was something that was not talked about in her family. She narrates, my mom did not have a problem with me being tibo, but my family never really talked about it. I do my own thing and they just saw me grow. In such context, therefore, the formation of family relation and kinship relies on the invisibility of the sexuality and lesbian identity and intimacy in the family, but the visibility of gender expression is very much ignored. So Kadjo became the primary caregiver of her family during her middle age. When she was in her early 40s, she looked after her mom for 10 years. parental caretaking is a gendered expectation that often falls in the laps of lesbian women because they are perceived as more likely to be single compared to their heterosexual or straight siblings, and therefore have less domestic responsibilities in the household. Kajo took the responsibility of parental caretaking because she concerned that her siblings cannot look after them as they have families of their own. In some way, Kajo subscribes to the Filipino expectation that the woman or the eldest child become the primary parental caretaker during illness and old age. But given her positive early childhood experience of love, care, and acquaintance, Kajo voluntarily and willingly accepted the responsibility. Kajo narrates that the love and care acceptance that she received from her parents at a young age translated to the kind of love and appreciation she showed her parents when she took care of them in the later life. Kajo frames the experience as an easy task given the nursing experience, but it was an emotional and tedious and draining process, especially in uncertain moments of illness and sickness. However, the partnership that she had with her then live-in girlfriend benefited in such responsibility of parental caretaking becomes a shared domestic responsibility. So her relationship with her then live-in partner was instrumental for her to take on that responsibility of domesticity. So on diasporic and lesbian community building. So according to Pereñas and Sue, Philippines and connectivity with other people displaced from the homeland across the diasporic terrain. Such collective consciousness and connectivity become essential tools for many Filipino women to survive the alienation and loneliness, which are the results of family separation and longing of being in the diaspora. In Kajo's case, the separation from her high school sweetheart was the source of her loneliness and fear of uncertainty when she moved to Canada. I met my first girlfriend in high school. I really missed her when I moved here. We wrote each other love letters. It was a long-distance relationship. I started to build friendships in my neighborhood in St. Jamestown. She used to live there when she first came to Canada. And that was how I met my first group of young lesbian Filipinas. So in her loneliness, she found comfort with other Filipinos in the neighborhood who identified as lesbians then. And it was the time when I needed someone to cope from the loneliness. She was able to find like-minded lesbian Filipinas in her neighborhood at a time when she most needed to have support. According to Freixas et al., across the life course, women learn from younger people and discover new perspectives and tendencies and adopt these without fears, incorporating new ideas, tastes, and values into their lives. So in her transitioning to Canada, she was able to find and sort of transition and settle in the Canadian sort of way of understanding sexuality and being gay and being lesbian. So this reading of women's practices of building the self and the community suggests that women find resilience in building meaningful connections with other women who share the same concerns and lived experiences. It was the forging of community and connections that were evident in Kajo's early experience of settlement in Canada that shaped her diasporic community. Despite women's ability to make meaningful connections, Filipino women in the diaspora experience a sense of dislocation. As Pereñas describes, dislocations are the difficulties encountered in navigating the complex social processes that occur during migration. As Kajo informs that during her settlement process in Canada, she continued her studies in high school while working at the hospital as a personal support worker. Even though the experience was easy for her, finding the space where her immigrant self is situated in school and work added to the complication of her sexual minority status of being a lesbian. The sense of support and friendship was an important element in Kajo's life transition in Canada. She was able to find friends in her neighborhood who were young Filipino lesbians, and finding that community was imperative for Kajo's transition and settlement. In her later life, Kajo was prepared prepared herself for a secured future. Kajus worked her entire life as a nurse practitioner and had supported her passion for travel and other material desires. For instance, et al. Iterate historically that women have developed a number of survival strategies that have their origin as persons deprived of personal, social, political, economic power. And so in that marginality, she was able to sort of lift herself outside of the oppression that she's experienced and the loneliness that she's experienced based on the migration experience that she's gone through. Their vulnerability, women's vulnerability has forced them to sharpen their natural gifts, often defined as the intuition or sixth sense, and which almost always refer to interpersonal relations, but also imply a questioning of the social order that marginalized them, and often to improve their personal and social positions. And disregard the communities that Filipino women in the diaspora network and organize with some sources of connections and relationships. According to Lowe, the immigrants' ability to build horizontal community with and between others are in different locations subjects of the state. Is important in the contemporary moment. In other words, the ability of Filipinas in the diaspora to make community of their own creates opportunity for them to ascertain a place of subject within the state. In conclusion, it is necessary that the assessment and articulation of the experiences of lesbian identified Filipinas in Canada need to be brought into the forefront of Filipino elderly aging. And I think it's really important that we pay attention to how we build communities when we, the moment we immigrate to Canada. Thank you.
Estrella he's a Bicol Tagalog settler currently residing in unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory in the city of Ottawa. They work with a variety of organizations and agencies, such as the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, the Philippine Migrant Society of Canada, Project Acorn, an LGBTQ youth leadership camp, the Ontario Committee of Human Rights in the Philippines, the Ottawa Center for Queer Community, and No One is Illegal Ottawa. They do numerous teachings on the diversity of the workplace and in school as the senior manager of JERS Vision, Canada's Youth Diversity Initiative. Aside from organizing communities and delivering workshops, Lucayo also is a spoken word artist and freelance writer. In 2014, they received a spoken word career development grant from the Ontario Arts Council and was also published in Out Proud, Stories of Pride, Courage, and Social Justice, edited by Douglas Gossi. Please welcome Lucayo.
I think I give you my condensed resume, I'm sorry. Ani, Kwekwe, Mabuhay, Lucayo ako, Tagalog at Bicol ako. Welcome, my name is Lucayo, and I am Bicol and Tagalog. Before I begin, I always like to do a thank you and an acknowledgement in my presentations. So I thank those who came before me, my ancestors and spirits. What my father taught me and other folks is you give an atang or a dulot to the ancestors and spirits. So I put sema, which is tobacco, banga, which is betel nut, and ginoskos ng nyog, which is coconut shavings for our ancestors here and for the people of this land and for the spirits of this land. I also like to thank those who continue to do this work, like Bina Ohan and all of you here. A lot of my influences were actually talked about in the previous panels, like Lenny Strobel. Also another influence would be Dylan Rodriguez and his monumental work, Suspended Apocalypse, White Supremacy, Filipino Condition, and Genocide, I think is what the entire giant book is called. So I thank the land and the people of the land, the contested territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of New Credit, and the Huron-Wendat. And I also apologize that this presentation is only in English. So basically, what I'm gonna probably do is talk about my story and then what the Western gender binary is and how we decolonize from it, and then do a closing. Just gonna try to condense it in 15 minutes. I'm primarily a storyteller and poet, so there's gonna be like storytelling and poetry and a lot of text, just in case for folks, if I talk too fast, then you'll also be able to read it on the screen. So my story, yeah, that's my dad, and then that glowy figure is me, awkwardly. Oh my God, I'm like, what's happening? So, so I was born in Quezon City, Luzon. My family is from Bicol, and I spent my early years in Legazpi and Tabaco. My parents were part of the EDSA People Power Revolution. I was 1 year old, and my brother was in my mom's womb when they phased down the tanks. My Aunt Mercy had already gone to Canada, and my parents, fearing for my family's safety, even after the Marcoses had fled, packed everything up to immigrate when I was around 3. I was privileged to have my entire family together, sponsored by my Aunt Mercy, and we moved to Scarborough with her and her family in the late 1980s. Things changed when I was in Canada. First of all, I had to adjust to what I at first thought was a plague of shimmery white salt covering everything and falling from the sky, followed by monstrous invisible entities that slowly hurt your body until you can no longer feel your limbs, i.e. winter. Then my parents stopped speaking to us in Tagalog and Bicol. I didn't know it then, but my father was horrified at how people treated him because of his thick accent. And that's why he pushed us to master English and leave our native languages behind. My mother began a daily regimen of whitening products like Escanol, especially on my face and hers. In the evening, she would press our noses, hoping for them to grow thin and long. She would press our teeth to grow straight and beautiful. That one actually worked. We never needed braces, and we couldn't afford them anyway. I didn't know it then, but my mother was horrified at the stereotypes of Filipinos she saw daily. That's why she pushed us to assimilate, to leave our native bodies behind. But it wasn't just what they had asked us to do that I struggled with. It's what my parents never told us that I ached for. I knew I was different from the other kids around me, the weird kid on the block, but I tried hard to do what was asked of me, to be the good child. It all changed in 10th grade when my best friend, let's call her Anne, came over one night and told me she was in love with me. I ran out of the room screaming. I did this because in my deeply Catholic-raised brain, I believed something sinister was going on. Either Anne saw me as a girl named Faye. That meant Anne was a girl that liked girls. Girls that liked girls were lesbians. My parents told me lesbians, what evil. Or Aunt saw me as a boy named Luke, and no one really knew that I was a boy because all my life my family said I was born with certain parts, and that made me a girl, even though I acted and felt like a boy a lot of the time, so I continued to try to be a girl and kept my boy Luke thing a secret, and if Anne knew my secret, then she was psychic, and girls who were psychic are witches, and witches, my parents told me, what evil. So there I was, pacing my living room, looking for a crucifix, trying to figure out how to expel this lesbian witch demon from my room, when I realized how ridiculous it was all. My friend Anne, my Anne, wasn't being evil. She was just being in love. I realized 2 things. 1, everything I may have been taught all my life could be lies. And 2, I was in love with her too. Oh, we passed the sex part, sorry. Everyone's like, I want to talk about where it says, there was sex, bam! So my parents did not take it well. I told my friends the next day that I had given my virginity to my friend Anne and asked them if I was gay. They said that since I still also like boys, that made me bisexual. It was the first time I'd heard the term, and excited by this revelation, I called my father immediately to share the news. Awkward. Apparently, my father knew the word. He asked me why I was bringing shame to the family and hung up the phone. The years that followed as I finished high school was tumultuous, to say the least. I'm just gonna pass all the emo and the drama and the screaming and the green hair and the, I gave birth to a clown, no, I'm so smutty. Anyways, so it was very intense. I moved to Ottawa to attend Carleton University at 18, mostly to get out of Scarborough, and slowly began to learn more words, more terms, all from Western understandings of gender. It was my favorite story about why I moved out of Scarborough. It was basically just the network. There's over 200,000 Filipinos in Scarborough. There's only 10,000 in Ottawa. So if I left school to say I was going to choir practice and went downtown and made out with someone, by the time I get back from my 6 p.m. curfew, 6 p.m. till I moved out, my mom would be like, Tita Virgie, said that Tita Lita, said that Tita Ann, so you kissing on the subway with someone that looked like a heroin addict. You are grounded. And I was like, what? 3 hours? What? How? Okay. So another reason why I left, to go to Ottawa, because the spy network wasn't there. They only knew one person in Ottawa. I was like, yes, I could avoid them. So this is what I started to understand in university about heteronormativity, and we talked about it in the other panels and what it meant. So as a kid who just grew up in a strict Catholic household, I had no idea what was going on with me. I didn't have any words. I didn't know what the word transgender was, what queer, bisexual, all of these things. But as I started to learn, I started to realize that we're dominated by these two pillars. So, there's when somebody gets born, a doctor looks between their legs and goes, oh, it's a boy, it's a girl. And then, like, if you get the blue blanket, you're supposed to be a man, you're supposed to be masculine, you're supposed to only have sex with women, you're supposed to end up being married with kids to one woman. Stats Canada says 1.8 children. So, and that's supposed to be your life. This is the first pillar, this is the second pillar. If you add patriarchy in, the second pillar is supposed to serve the first pillar. Boom, then you have, the nuclear family, and that's how life is supposed to be. But already, I realized I wouldn't fit into this life. Like a quick description of my journey, I guess I started out in the It's a Girl column, but I knew immediately that I was a man or a woman. I'm not quite sure. I mean, it was very masculine. I liked to punch people and like wear hats and stuff, but I liked glittery, nail polish and like, ponies. And then what's happening with me, And then I was like, oh, I guess I like boys. And I'm like, oh, and then I gave my virginity to Anne, sex, bam. And I was like, oh, I want to have sex with everyone. So, and that started happening. I was like, does he mean bisexual? But like bisexual just means like men and women, and I want to have sex with everyone. So outside of that, and then my relationships, right now it's so hilarious. I actually brought two of my partners to visit my parents, and like I had to use the language that we understand. So I explained one of them is a bakla, and one of them is a tomboy, and the bakla is going to be the yaya to our children, and the tomboy is going to give birth to the children using my brother's sperm. And they were like, all right, Merry Christmas. And they just like, here's some food, hello. It was like my two partners who are used to like parents being awful to them because they're so genderqueer and non-binary was like, this was the best Christmas I've ever had in my life. I'm not even Christian. Oh my God. And I'm like, boop, Filipino. Anyways. So, but it took a long time. I mean, last time we checked, my parents drove me out of the house and I was enraged. So how did we get there? Anyways, this is more about how we delineate it by the West. Here's a lot of words by the West: cisgender, genderqueer, intersex, trans man, trans woman, transgender, transsexual. These are the sexualities in the West: asexual, bisexual, gay, heterosexual, homosexual, lesbian, pansexual, queer. That's not even all of them. There's like demisexual now. There's so many things. But it wasn't until I met another person with Tagalog ancestry years after I graduated university that helped me make sense of it all. Through Bibi Naohan's landmark work, Decolonizing Transgender 101, and her amazing blog on the intersections of transmisogyny, cissexism, Orientalism, colonialism, and racism, I started to understand how these Western terms, though precious to me when I needed them, were still part of a large, white supremacist, cis-heteropatriarchal, and imperialist project. The same kind of project that pushed my father to ask me to forget my native language, that pushed my mother to ask me to forget my native body. I began to understand and research that before colonization, the Bicol people and the Tagalog people had their own concepts of gender and sexuality. Though written by Western scholars, I highly recommend Barangay by William Henry Scott and Shamanism, Catholicism, and Gender Relations in Colonial Philippines, 1521 and 1685 by Carolyn Brewer. I did more research also outside of the Philippines and discovered that gender and sexual orientation in cultures outside of the West aren't necessarily separated or understood in the way the West divides it. Who you end up dating may not need a word, since it's an action and an identity. Or perhaps it's embedded on the role you have within your society on a spiritual and cultural level that includes how you present yourself and the activities you do within the community. So here's some examples. I have bakla there. So some of the ways that bakla is described is an umbrella term, and it can range from people who have feminine mannerisms, wear feminine clothing, who identify as women. Awesome. Okay, gonna speed this up. There's the Zanith, the third gender in the Sultanate of Oman. There's the Mino, and they were a third gender from the Kingdom of Dahomey, present-day Benin. There's a Fafafina from the Samoa. There's a Hijra from South Asia, and then there's the Two-Spirit people. Anyone who wants a copy of this, I can send it to them because I don't have time to read through all the definitions. As I began to reconnect with my culture, I found other non-binary, those outside of the Western gender binary, Filipinxes, so those who have ancestry that can be traced to the archipelago colonially known as the Philippines. We realized how important this work is. For me, sometime after university, estranged from my family, facing difficult times spiritually, emotionally, and physically, I don't think I would have made it without my deep sense of connection through decolonization and the self-love that was fostered through those revelations. I also finally found a common language in history my parents and I could understand. And with this process, they supported my medical transition of testosterone and my name change. The last 2 summers, my parents have introduced me to my extended family in Scarborough and in Bicol as Lucayo, their eldest child, their son. Oh my God, look at this, family reunion. I'm hanging out with all the masculine folks. Yeah, like the shortest besides Virgil. Sorry, Virgil. And then here's in Bicol, there's my cousin with her British husband, and there's me and my dad, and there's my mom. Yeah. Oh my God, look at all that food. I'm so hungry. It is my dearest hope that work in this field will continue, that we will rediscover and reclaim terms beyond bakla and tomboy. It's just as important to decolonize queerness as it is to queer decolonization. Ang hindi lumingon sa pinanggalingan, hindi makararating sa paroroonan. One who does not look back to where they has come from will not reach their desired destination. I want the youth of my generation and those who come after me to have reached their desired destination, to know and feel at home in themselves. For when we have treated ourselves with justice, then we can more fully tackle the larger issues of oppression in our communities, demanding justice for our Panay communities, our trans and queer communities, our indigenous communities, our black communities, our poor, and building solidarity around the world. So in closing, I'd like to share with you this poem, if that's cool. It's called The Ground Cries Out. For you, the ground cries out. For you are not buried in rows. For you are scattered in the between, the indigo amber of pre-dawn through arched doorways, the poignant pause within phrases. For you in death, like in life, defy the neat boxes and straight lines of application forms, of washroom signs, of clothing styles, of job interviews, of doctor's offices, of prison cells, of border booths, of lists of names called out once a year and then subsequently forgotten. Just like your roles and titles, just like your bodies and artifacts, just like your communities, all cut down, dismembered into pieces and thrown to the consuming mouths of dogs and crocodiles. Almost nothing remains but tattered scripts recorded by the pens of conquerors who forgot that they could not erase your blood that was spilled on the lands that were taken from you. So for you, the ground cries out. For you, the truth will be uncovered. For you, the breath of understanding will return once more by us, your descendants and heirs. Remembrance, rediscovery, reunion. We will gather all those seeds of hope ready to take root. Those doctors, those scientists, those legislators, those theorists, they will call us man, woman, female, male, butch, femme, transgender, transsexual, gender variant, gender queer, gender independent, non-binary, homosexual, queer, cross-dresser, intersex, drag king, drag queen, trans, but we are none of these things. We are none of these words, these names built like chains from the pens of conquerors and their heirs who created for us a solitary confinement, a lonely exile from land and from truth, but we will collect our seeds of reclaiming, to cultivate and grow again. From this land, they chose two-spirit. Some still use agukwenine. From my land, we have bakla, yet older still with blood spilled is asog. Like shoots pushing through concrete, unstoppable, inevitable, to grow again, saving the people, serving the people, building families, writing blogs, raising voices, so that we will be treated fairly for the work we do, so that we can access help when we are sick, so that we can access justice when we are wrong, so that we can walk down the street without fearing for our lives and dignity from those who would seek to conquer us again and put us into what they think our place is, but they can never completely control us. They can never completely wipe us out, for we are the indigo amber of pre-dawn through arched doorways. We are the poignant pause within phrases, for we will never grow in rows, for we are scattered in the in-between, and the ground cries out in triumph as we thrive.